Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. My name is Patrice Lindo. I am the CEO of Career Nomad and a workforce futurist. I'm dedicated to helping institutions and professionals just like yourself navigate change with purpose, equity, and innovation. Today in our session, Bridging Education and AI Empowering Change Through Data-Driven Insights and Resilient Strategies, we are here to have a real conversation, not just about what's possible with AI, but also about how to lead boldly and ethically at this moment. Because if no one's realized it, we're in the bit of I'm going to say a digital golden era. And the thing about it is that AI is not only coming, it's here. The question is, how are we showing up and how are we going to meet the moment? Because we're seeing AI in just about everything that we do. So why does this matter now? You may be saying, right? We're talking about how, you get prompts on your phone. We're talking about geofencing if you have, let's say expressed interest even verbally without searching on your phone and you start seeing, ads for a particular item. We're talking about things like ChatGPT, right? So the future of learning is already here, but it's not evenly distributed. So what can we do, right? One of the solutions could be that AI in education can help to close gaps or widen them. I can remember when my own children were in school and they were able to issue Google tablets, because at the time, not every child had, a computer or access to a computer when they were at home. Again, different children, different background, but it helped to close that technology gap, right? That's often, the situation as we go through different levels of education. So in this session, this is a call to lead with both innovation and intention. So at this point, I would say AI is transforming every industry, and of course, education is not exempt. Now, as we're thinking about it, our job, your job, is to make sure we're amplifying inclusive, ethical, and outcomes based on student success, centered on student success. So our objectives today. Number one, we want to talk through how to integrate AI and data insights to align with your institutional missions and drive student success, accelerate student success, I should say. Secondly, we want to build responsible AI policies that balance not only innovation with equity, but also inclusion, because different people learn different ways coming from different backgrounds. And then finally, we want to apply my bespoke method, the RNA method, to lead, change, and deliver measurable outcomes. So you may be wondering, what is RNA? RNA is rebrand, network, and achieve recognition. And as we think about that and talk about it in today's session, these are the key places that we're going to go along this journey today. We're going to talk about the state of AI in education. We're going to talk about the RNA framework that I just mentioned. We're going to go through a couple of case studies, both one that's at the K-12 level and the higher ed level. We're going to talk through some responsible AI policies because we have to keep ethics as the hub of what we're doing. And then finally, I have some tools and templates that you can use immediately as you are going back into your schools. So one of the things that you want to think through is, what is the state of AI in education currently? So we'll talk about some stats. We'll talk about some ways that it has actually begun to be used throughout, right? Whether it's predictive analytics, whether it's AI-powered tutors and assistants, whether it's just personalized learning and engagement. But what does that really mean? 73% of institutions are actively using or exploring AI, which, to be honest, is needed because the same thing is happening in corporate America, and we're preparing, right, the future of corporate America. So that definitely makes sense. So what we want to think about is, as we look at the different trends, whether it comes to AI-powered chatbots, whether it comes to, analytics, whether it comes to adaptive learning applications and systems, how can we and you, as you're going back into your classrooms, really institute some of these things? And we also want to make sure that we're thinking about things like bias in the algorithms. How are we doing so in a way that's not only secure from the data that's shared in these tools, but also protecting our students? And then also, like I mentioned earlier, that digital equity gap. How are we caring for those things? Because the reality of the situation is, as we go out, for example, and we put, our latest, travel, inquiry, for example, about where to go when we go to a particular location, we are giving that data, or dedicating, I should say, that data to that particular tool, which becomes a part of the generated, I'm going to say, data. And we have to make sure that that's done with care. So as we're thinking about that, whether it's finding, new ways to present information, whether it's helping to accelerate research or point, you in the right direction, or your students, whether it's, thinking through what a particular type of learning dictates, and really being able to, I'm going to say, expedite, right, how we get that information. We want to keep that top of mind, and also cross-check anything that's happening. So if you think about, for example, bias in the algorithms, depending on, let's say, if you ask a question about, let's say, students in, let's say, North America versus students, internationally. If you ask, for example, questions about predictability in workforce choices, let's say in Chicago versus Atlanta, you want to make sure that you're always, questioning and correcting, course correcting if needed, the information that's shared back to you, in that way that, it's not only just auto-generated, but it's also very thoughtful and intentional. Any questions on that? All right. So digging into the RNA framework, like I said, rebrand, network, and achieve recognition. So as you're thinking about rebranding, right, what does that look like? So as you're thinking about the different types of, I'm going to say, content development and instructional design that you're doing, using and implementing for your students, how does it align with your mission, right, to be digitally inclusive? So if you are teaching history, if you are teaching math, if you're teaching civics, how is it that you are presenting this information and gathering the information necessary to really show that balanced, I'm going to say, a level of content, and making sure that you reach the students, right, that is in your, I'm going to say, purview and in your population, whether that's face-to-face or online. That's one of the things you want to make sure you do. So way back in the day when I would teach, for example, I had, I'm going to date myself, the teacher's edition. And so what I would do is I would literally study, let's say, the chapters that I was going to be presenting that week. And then not only study them, but it was like I was taking the course myself and come up with some of the, for example, questions that I thought that students would have, points that I thought they may get stuck. I would literally take that lesson and create a lesson plan that made sense to me, so that I could properly, I'm going to say, disseminate that to the students. Because if I couldn't do that, then I was not necessarily, again, making it inclusive, demonstrating not only my understanding, but being able to meet them where they were and bring them along the journey. So now that, of course, has evolved, because it's been, nearly 20 years since I've been in at least the elementary classroom. One of the things that I make sure that I do is, okay, so as we're doing this, what is it that people need to know? What is their access? What are potential questions that they may have? What are the outcomes that we need to drive, so that it's really future forward in how, not only how I'm presenting that information, but it's sparking the same type of behavior, or demonstrating or modeling that same type of behavior to the students. So that's the rebranding piece. And that's where we as educators, really get a chance to curate what our students are learning, and making sure that that alignment is happening. So second, for networking, as you're thinking about networking, are you building those partnerships, those alliances that not only multiply, but amplify the impact that you're having? So for example, when I was teaching, let's say, Spanish, for example, I would also connect with the business teacher, for example, because there was a need for, or is, I should say, a need for us to cross collaborate, because in those partnerships, as my students were learning Spanish, if we could marry that with the real-time business, topics that were happening, it helped to not only keep the students engaged, but intrigue them about what's happening in the world while they were learning a foreign language, for example. Another thing is that as we did, let's say chemistry, for example, we brought in, for example, not only the students that were learning chemistry, but we brought in, for example, medical students that were able to speak to how they've used the foundation that they had when they were at that level of schooling. And now as they're in medical school, how it actually applies. So there are different ways for you to build cross-sector partnerships that really not only multiply and amplify your impact, but it also plants the seeds, right, for what the students will do in the future. And that really just does so in a way that really not only grounds what you're doing, but it lights a fire under them. Thirdly, when it comes to achieving recognition. So as you are doing these, I'm going to say, different types of activities and, gathering the information in different ways to present the content to your students, what is it that's happening? Are you, for example, doing things outside of the school that speak to your industry? Are you giving talks? Are you publishing papers? Are you, working a second job that, is really in the field that you love? You want to make sure that you demonstrate the human side, I'm going to say professional side of what you're doing in addition to what you're doing in the school. So, or in the institution. So one of the things that's important is that the students or the people that are learning are not only seeing what you do and what you teach them from day to day, but also how you apply that and what those outcomes are. And that's how you achieve the recognition that I'm speaking about, that demonstrates, right, to your learners that this is human-centered, that this is how you change the narrative when it comes to, more students, for example, in the STEM field, or how to have the ability to pivot careers if that's what they're interested in doing, because they truly understand their transferable skills or what they're good at, or they're able to go out and really become that innovator that not only can see the work that they're doing right now in front of them, but where that work can be in the future. So we need this to sustain momentum. And if they see you doing that, that's a great way to do it future forward. So one of the things that I want to encourage you to do is always keep in mind the RNA framework. That's rebrand, network, and achieving recognition. Because as you do that, you are creating the future that we really want to see. So if we dig into rebrand, for example, the first thing that I would suggest that you do is conducting a digital mission audit, like I had mentioned earlier. So when you dig into that, for example, as you are looking at the content that you're presenting, as you are having the different learning opportunities, are there ways that you can infuse, I'm going to say not just digital, I'm going to say trends or impact, but are there ways that you can really meet the moment where it is and bring your content to life for the students that you're working with in a way that truly gets them thinking, that truly helps them to be innovative, that truly helps them to be change makers? Because once you do that, it's not just you presenting, for example, content that, has been, I'm going to say, coming from the publishers, it's you making it come to life. So once you audit that and then you look for those opportunities and then you find ways to infuse them, then, some will work, some won't. But you'll find that when you do that and you show up in that way that is almost like a testing laboratory, that's a great way for you to really, like I said, rebrand with intention. Second, you want to make sure that the things that you're doing, that they are in a place where their values align with equitable AI integration. Because as we're looking, for example, at maybe different chatbots or maybe, different ways to infuse AI, or whether it's machine learning, whatever the case might be, are we doing so in a way that really is equitable to those in the room? Because people are differently abled, people have different types of access, different, I'm going to say, equitable types of access. So we want to make sure that that's what's happening. So one of the things you want to ask yourself is, does your use of AI truly reflect your promise to all students in helping them to learn? Because rebranding is not just visual, right? It's also philosophical as you really think about it. So as you're updating your institution's, I'm going to say, identity, it's important that it's aligned with the future that you're trying to build. Any questions? Mallory, I'm assuming we're okay? All right, let's go on to networking with purpose. So, as you're thinking about networking with purpose, one of the things that you really want to make sure of is that, like I mentioned, you build coalitions. So, depending on your institution, your chief innovation officer, your chief learning officer, your chief HR officer, your faculty, your DEI members, and the list goes on and on. Employee resource groups, that sort of thing. Who is it or what groups within your organization or industry can you build those partnerships with, right? And then external to that, what companies can you connect with? Are there different places where there are learning hubs, whether it be nonprofit or for profit, within your locality, within your region, within your industry? Are there ways for you to do that in a way that it not only makes sense for your students, it makes sense for you professionally. It helps to, I'm going to say, expand, right, the reach of the work, the great work that I'm sure you're doing. How can you do that? And of course, keeping that student center, how can we include their voice, right, in that tool development and policy design? Because they're the consumers, right, of what we're doing. So as you are building those partnerships, look for those opportunities, if you're not already, to deepen and really, I'm going to say, give voice to the student, right, and their needs as we're developing those tools. So that's, as we're thinking about how to network with purpose, those are things that we want to keep top of mind, because we do need to break the silos that exist, right? AI implementation doesn't just sit with, IT or academic affairs. It's a community of people that will help to bring this forward. We need these partnerships, right? We need them not only for ourselves as, I'm going to say, purveyors of learning, but also for the students. So if we design with the students, then it's not just for them, it is them. So we want to make sure that we're doing that. All right. So as you're thinking about the next and final step, achieving recognition, you want to be sure that you're sharing your data transparently. So whether it's equity dashboards, success milestones, really doing everything you can so that you are really showing up in a way that not only is full of integrity, but also clearly defined, that would be the way to go, so that you are showing yourself as not only a thought leader, but a leader when it comes to being innovative and being inclusive and being equitable. And these are things that are truly important, because again, this is how you're not only showing the impact that you're able to create, but also the outcomes, right, that the students will actually experience themselves, that will hopefully motivate them to do the same thing in some way, shape, or form as they are learning and progressing. So as you're thinking about that, the next thing you want to do is make sure that you celebrate small wins publicly. So micro recognition drives engagement. So did you teach a student, for example, different types of prompts, for example, to use, whether it's in, what is it, Chat GPT, or the Google tool, or whatever, your poison is, because there's several different tools. And they were able to use that to, let's say, accelerate their research on a particular topic, or they were able to, do the proofreading, for example, for a particular, let's say, paper or something they were doing, or they were able to get, let's say, the structure for a newsletter, for example, or how to, create a presentation, for example, in PowerPoint, that, it gave them the framework, and then they could go in, and fill in the blanks, so to speak. Once you do those things, use those things as examples, right? Use them as examples so that others can see what's happening. And it's not, this cumulative, like at the end, we show everything, but we take people on that journey, because not only does it drive engagement, it drives entrenchment, it drives behavior change, it drives all of the things, the good behaviors that we want to make sure they do are using, I should say, as they are learning. So the second thing is celebrate small wins publicly. Thirdly, as you're thinking about what this needs to look like, there's a lot of opportunity out there for not only grants, but innovation type awards and recognition. So what is it that's happening again in your industry and community that you could use to be able to, not only talk about the work that you are doing with your students, but also maybe what your school is doing, maybe what's happening in your industry and bringing it back to the school, that sort of thing. You want to think of, these are just some, I'm going to say, initial steps that you can use when you're looking to achieve recognition as the final part of the RNA method. So with change, it can be visible in the blink of an eye and also in a big explosion. You want to make sure more than anything else it's sustainable. So I would just remind you to start small and build from there. So next, we're going to look at some case studies. So in the case studies, the first one is our K-12 STEM equity. So there was a lack of access to advanced STEM content at a particular institution. And by that, I mean, their science books, were probably from maybe 10 or so years ago. I'm going to say resources available to, let's say, perform different, I'm going to say laboratory experiments in their labs at the school were outdated and not available or constantly broken. There were just different things, right? Different types of, I'm going to call them roadblocks or challenges, I should say, that this particular school district was experiencing. So one of the things that, I'm going to say, after doing some research, found that they could possibly use as I'm going to say an alternative is to use AI-driven adaptive platforms for early learners. So this is like simulations. So if you think of like when the kids are playing their video games like Minecraft, right? And I just use as an example, there are ways that we can, I'm going to say virtually take kids on the experience of what it looks like to experience advanced STEM content. Now, while it's not the same as actually doing it, touching it, feeling it, but it is a simulation that helps to not only train them, but intrigue them and build that muscle memory in the interim. And it's something that doesn't necessarily require the investment in the hard, I'm going to say, equipment that it would take to do that. When that was done, there was a 27% boost in student performance, because then they could literally tap into the memory of, oh, when I did this particular module, we did this, we did that. This is what I learned while I was there. Oh, they asked about this, or I saw, XYZ thing happening. But most importantly, it increased their confidence, right? Especially in underrepresented student groups that had never really experienced it, right? They had read about it maybe in textbooks and teachers spoke about it, but when they were able to make that connection virtually, then that helped, I'm going to say, to not only redefine, right, what science and STEM could look like for them, but it helped to open up, right, their questions. It helped to really, I'm going to say, help them to really see what the possibility of the future could look like based on what they had seen. And so that was one way that they found, if we were able to, I'm going to say, expand the use of AI-driven adaptive platforms, that's one way to help to close that gap and really get students some of the exposure that they needed. So while it doesn't solve everything, it did begin to address the problem. So the next case study is for higher ed retention. So the challenge was that first generation student dropout rates in year one was inexplicably high. And so what were they going to do about that, right? I myself have college students that are graduating this year. However, when they started, their class had about 400 freshmen, and now they're down to actually 80. So this is a real-time issue and concern. So what would they do, right, to be able to, I'm not going to say solve that problem, but probably help to resolve that problem? Well, one of the things is predictive analytics, right, and nudge tech. So for example, our students that are in particular, for example, majors, or that went to, let's say, a particular school, or that have a particular grade point average, or whatever the filters we want to think about, is there a way that we can, detect what trends are? Again, keeping bias in mind, right, to not do that. How can we use that information to help to predict, if you call it that, success rate, right? And when I say success, success for getting, the year one retention rate higher, because we're able to, I'm going to say, almost hone and provide that proactive support to those students that, had a higher likelihood of being the ones to drop out. Also from nudge tech, right? So if you have, for example, an iPhone, one of the things it will say is, you haven't stood up, in X number of minutes, it's time for you to stand up. Or, if at times, let's say you have unsteady gait, or, if you're wearing an Aura ring, it'll say, your blood pressure is going up, or whatever the case might be. If those are all examples of nudge tech. So are there different interventions that could be used for those students? Is it, have you, you didn't have, 8 hours of sleep, you need to try to get, rest in the day, or have you started your homework, or you have, a test coming up, in 2 days, you want to make sure that you do X, Y, Z. It could be a mix of things, but what are the interventions that can be used? So for this particular instance, they did more with the nudge tech, right? So all of the students were in their, they have a platform that they use. And in that platform, it not only shows grades and their assignments and their coursework, but it also gives them reminders about, when upcoming assignments were due. The different, I'm going to say, factors that come into play, that if, for example, they have 3 tests in a week, how they should potentially, scale out their time so that they're ready. Or if they had, different, let's say, commitments, like maybe doctor's appointments or, social engagements, whatever the case might be, how it can take a holistic look at their schedule so that they could show up as they needed to, right? For their, not only their grades, but themselves, and keeping, them healthy and whole, or at least as much as technology can remind them to be, because they're students, right? So what the impact was for this case was that there was an 18% retention improvement over 2 semesters, right? And then in addition to that, it also increased advisor-student engagement, right? Because that's another way that, once, the reporting comes out behind this, that we nudged Sally X times and Sally's grades went up, went down, or she's trending in a particular direction, then that helps to signal to the support, right? The human support, the advisor, to say, hey, Sally, how's it going? Just checking in. I noticed that XYZ, type thing. Again, these are ways that we can use the different tactics to make sure that the outcomes that we're looking to drive and amplify and accelerate within our students are really happening. All right. So the last thing that we really want to think through is the ethical AI policy design. So there are 3 must-haves, yes, and you can see these on, the screen. But what I want to really remind you is that every institution really has an opportunity to establish a baseline for ethical AI use. So if you start with things like building an AI ethics board that not only includes student voices, but also cross-disciplinary voices, that's one way, right? That if you do that, that helps to really make sure that, different varying backgrounds and I'm going to say experiences within life and knowledge come into play. Next, we want to prioritize inclusive data sets, right? So we don't want to replicate bias, yes. We also want to show and demonstrate inclusiveness. Next, you want to be transparent. You want to let students know when AI is being used and how, and also give your guidelines for how they can use AI, right, in their work. Because let's be honest, they are using it in some way, shape, or form. So how can we clearly establish the policies for using it? Then finally, you want to designate accountability. You want to make sure that if something goes wrong, who owns it, right? So as you're thinking about what your ethical AI policy needs to look like, you want to make sure that these things are top of mind. Now, is this everything? No, but this is your starting place, right? So that board is what humanizes it. That transparency is what gives the lens or amplification to integrity that's needed. And then as you're thinking about equity, you want to make sure that you have data that not only represents and reflects diversity, but it also mitigates any sort of opportunity for historical bias, because we all have them. All right. So next, as you're thinking about how to put this all together, I've designed a little bit of a mini workshop. So as we are thinking about responsible AI, here's a prompt for you to think about, right? And so here I put, via Menti or poll, but I think it also could be something that you guys can think through, right? As we're doing this, what student success issue would your AI initiative address, right? Are there opportunities that you can look at AI as I'm going to say an amplifier, an accelerator at your learning institution? That's the first thing. Second, what safeguards would you build in as you're designing this to ensure ethics, equity, and mission alignment? Because those are the two key anchors, right? That we want to make sure that as you're thinking about responsible AI, that you keep these in mind. So I know that I believe the chat is you're not necessarily able to respond, but these are things that I want you to keep in mind. All right. So some of the tools that you want to think through as you are, designing what your AI, your next version, I should say, of AI, or your first version of AI looks like at your organization, is 4 things: an AI risk template assessment that I have in this presentation, a student impact mapping worksheet, an ethical AI policy starter guide, and an RNA strategy alignment checklist. These 4 things are the pillars that you can use to not only initiate, if you don't have one already, but to strengthen your AI posture at your learning organization. And as a bonus, we talked about it a couple of times, I've also included a digital mission audit self-assessment for yourself so that you can take a look at this and see where you land. So here's the AI risk template assessment. So you'll notice that on the left, I've given, kind of the objective. So you want to evaluate any potential ethical, legal, or operational risks that any AI initiative could potentially, cause, and what that looks like. Then you'll notice that on the right, I've created a table where, again, you can begin to look at, the key areas, right? If you think of risk as it relates to bias, privacy, transparency, data integrity, and accountability, hey, this is a great place to start, and what that description looks like, and the likelihood, impact, and your plan if it comes up. So let's say, for example, this doesn't currently exist at your institution, and in you creating it, right, for you to be able to bring this to your leadership at your school, you have to, I'm sure, have a plan. So this is one way to, I'm going to say, synthesize, right, everything that you put together, in addition to showing or demonstrating how you have thought through what the risk is and if there's any additional changes or how things may have sailed. It definitely gives a beginning and end to the idea that you may have. All right, so that's your risk assessment template. Next, for the student impact mapping worksheet, right? Because the students are at the center of what's happening. How can we really document how the AI initiative will affect different student groups, right? To ensure equity and access. So what are we trying to improve for the students? Is it retention? Is it access? Is it engagement? Is it, success as a whole? What does that look like? So one of the things that you want to think through is, who are the different groups? What's the potential benefit? And what's the plan for inclusion? In addition to, what questions have you answered with regards to equity? All right. And then next, the ethical AI policy starter guide, right? So these are some things that you want to think through when it comes to establishing that baseline, all right, of institutional policy when it comes to responsible AI integration. So the core pillars are purpose and alignment, transparency, student privacy, accountability, and continuous review. These are things that, again, as you are, getting things off the ground or solidifying things for an existing program, that will help to give you that soup to nuts approach to starting AI at your institution. All right. So then next, the RNA strategy alignment checklist. So as we talked about, right, when it comes to rebranding, networking, and achieving recognition, here are some questions that you can ask yourself to guide not only your AI transformation, but I would say anything that really aligns with your mission, your digital mission, your AI mission at your organization. So here are some alignment questions, your ability to self-assess and give the current status, and then what your next step or your actions would be with regards to making this come to alignment or come to life. Okay. And then next, what you have here is how you are going to assess what is happening within your particular school, right? So as you're thinking about your school or your institution's missions and practices and technology adoption, how would you rate these, right? If your mission includes language about innovation, equity, or future of work, does your leadership understand and communicate how AI impacts education? How do you consult with students when adopting new technologies to make sure you've heard not only what they're interested in, but what their needs are, or, making sure that we have included the voice of the customer, which in this case is our students, right? What is your digital strategy, and does it include ethical and inclusive AI considerations? Does your faculty and staff have access to training on data and AI tools? And if not, what are we going to do about it? And then finally, do you have a system that tracks student outcomes across technology platforms? Based on the answers that you give, the rating that you give, there's a way that you can interpret, right, your readiness at your institution. You'll notice that on the 25 to 30 point scale, you're future ready. For 15 to 24, you're building alignment. And below 15, you probably want to recenter your digital vision and then activate institutional change. And of course, it's not as simple as that, but it's a place to give a pause to make sure that you've begun to really think through where some of the opportunities lie. All right. Any questions on that? This slide deck will be shared so you can actually get these templates so that you can begin to use them as you are going back to your schools. So here are some of the final takeaways, because I want to make sure we leave time for questions. Don't just adopt AI, right? Adapt your systems and values. Next, innovation without equity is incomplete transformation. So we want to make sure that we are keeping both of those things top of mind. Then finally, use the RNA framework to lead boldly and build resilience, not just in your students, but also in yourself. Because what we're doing here is building by example, right? We're building our plane as we fly. So if you use the RNA framework to rebrand boldly, network strategically, and gain the recognition that moves this work forward, we are well on our way. All right. So if you are interested, here is my contact information. My name is, like I said, Patrice Lindo, CEO of Career Nomad, and this is where you can contact me on LinkedIn. You have my email address, you have my website. Of course, if there's any questions that you have, we have about 10 minutes left for you to do so, but let's lead this shift together. Thank you so much for this time today.